initiative. I'm sort of NTI's technical lead on the data and mapping side. So I interact with all 56 state grantees, state territories, and I also oversee large portions of our contract with the FCC to produce and maintain the national broadband map. In terms of the conversations I have, they range from the $163 million on to collect the data side over a period of 5 years, all the way to product design of the national broadband map, book, deal, function. The real goal. So the purpose of this panel is really just going to be more of an interactive conversation, so I'm probably going to retreat to my laptop. The real notion is I'd like to get people engaged. We'd like to get people engaged in just having conversations kind of about what's going on in the mapping world, who's doing what are ways we can improve, what are things that people are hearing. But first, let me ask, how many people have visited the national broadband map, broadbandmap.gov? Okay. And how many people have either worked for or with one of the state broadband initiative grantees? All right, about half of you. How many people have downloaded a data set from the national broadband map? All right, and then finally, how many people have downloaded and read a grantee methodology paper? So a description of how grantees collect, verify, and integrate data. All right, so mostly grantees and Bradford.
The question was, how many people in here work hands-on with the broadband data from their state?
So we've got a couple of starter questions or some topics that we thought might be interesting to discuss. And with me is Stephanie Jane, who's North Carolina's actually technical lead on the for ENC on the data project. So the couple of questions we were thinking about. Basically, what we'll do is we'll throw out some ideas. We'll type the questions up, and then we'll kind of divide off into groups and see who wants to discuss what, and then come back and kind of share with everyone else kind of how the conversation went. So what question I have is, it's the data good, bad, or ugly? Question mark. Another question is, out-of-state legislators, how are you communicating with state legislators or policy officials about the data? So those are the two things, those are the two questions that I'm very interested in answering in this session. Does anyone else have a suggestion? Any other questions? So we're going with these two.
What was the second?
How are you communicating with policymakers about the data? Yes, ma'am?
Well, I'd be curious if anybody is actually able to collect any pricing data, and if so, how?
Pricing data. That's a great one. Thomas, anything you wanna? All right.
Maybe could we address something about converting geographic specificity?
Geography. What is geography?
Yeah, so going between maybe FIPS and zips.
Granularity?
Yeah.
Another question we had is what is broadband availability? So many times you'll either see a definition based on speed, which is going to be 4.1 versus 3.768, or you're going to see 768 200. In some cases, there'll also be a technological difference. So in some statistics, you'll see satellite data. In some statistics, you won't see satellite data. In some, you also won't see mobile data, counting towards sort of served, underserved. So I think that's another conversation. So I guess we can insert
one more. The difference between maximum advertised and average speed.
Okay.
Like typical speeds?
Typical speed.
Okay.
So So we can do this in one of two ways. We can either break off into subsections, probably do about 2 groups here, or we could just kind of have a group discussion and just kind of go around. So I'm pretty comfortable either way. So how many people would rather break off and have a group discussion?
Break off or?
Well, have small group discussions. And how many people want to just have a conversation amongst everyone? The ayes have it. So yeah, let's just start. Data, good, bad, or ugly? Who's got an opinion?
Well, a lot of data we get, in particular from some of the large providers, it's not necessarily good data per se, it's just ugly data. I'm not sure if any of the other states have the same issues or not, but whereas, in particular this round, as you and I talked about, as far as where providers have gone through the update from 2000 census blocks to 2010 census blocks, where their conversion is not exactly clean. I think that's kind of an understatement, of course. So I was wondering if anybody's had any, real world looking at.
So when you talk, would you say your first name and then who you work with? So this is Thomas Melton. He's with Connect Arkansas, which is the designated entity in Arkansas. Anyone else want to comment about that? I hear a call about ugly data coming into state grantees.
In North Carolina, it seems to vary greatly by provider. So we found that that means it's more important than ever to maintain relationships with each provider and try to meet them in the middle based on what they have to work with.
And based on that provider, are you noticing differences in between provider types? So do you notice that cable comes in a certain way? Do you notice that DSL comes in a certain way, or is it more of a mixed bag?
It's, at least from what we get turned in Arkansas, it's not a difference between the technologies per se, it's a difference between the provider sizes. The big national providers, they all submitted in nice little database, it's nice and clean looking, but you know, I think the problem is you have a guy that's a data guy that's sitting there extracting all this information that doesn't have a hands-on familiarity with it, that you know, it would be impossible for him to recognize the issues when there are issues.
So
And then the smaller providers, you know, and I think we've talked about before, the small providers, we've gotten completely away from them submitting, you know, address or address ranges or anything like that. They actually submit either a shape file, a DWG file, or we actually send them a paper map and they mark it up with file numbers. And that way we kind of keep that relationship with providers as tight as we can. So.
Arizona has the same issue. The hybrid that finally came out of the agreement where addresses could be substituted for shape files caused a continued lack of data at the granular level. And in Arizona, we're thanks to the mapping dollars, we'll eventually be able to present a background grid of all the addresses as we see it in the state. We need the best address file that we can possibly have, and being based on county information. So now we'll be able to say, okay, we have all this data coming in about how many customers are in a particular census block, how many households and how many actual addresses are in that census block, and what's the dispersions, kind of, sort of. They'll never report the data at less than the census block level, but at least we'll be able to say these particular areas are unserved or underserved. And the other thing we're struggling with, and we really need to help on, and I'd like to hear from others about this, what is the definition of underserved and unserved, because that is going to be one of our criteria to push our own legislature and use our own broadband universal service funds for Arizona, our own Arizona broadband universal service fund, to in fact build out. That would be the priority basis that we'll use.
Just a quick comment on the address points. things that again was talking about, we receive funding as well to create address points in the state. The problem we ran into with that is some of the providers are interested in, the problem is very few are interested in a standardized list of addresses because they don't have the funding or the time to have one set there, someone sit there and say, okay, this is rural route 2, box 68, but it should be 127 Smith Street. And that's kind of the roadblock we're running into as far as trying to standardize it. So,
but we're willing to do some of the work ourselves and figure that out. And to have a common address, but at the census block level, you can get counts. And so, you really want to see the lay of the land because technology takes you down the street, or it doesn't take you down the street, and a lot of our inconsistencies are where people call us and complain.
Right.
They look at the national map, they look at our map and say, you know what, you guys are lying through your teeth. We don't get this kind of service at our levels. And that's really a credibility issue about the whole process that we are quite concerned about.
Is that the biggest issue that you're faced with is essentially dealing with overstatement in the map?
I think it depends. So obviously we've got this, I think the biggest challenge, hands down, has been getting 56 grantees in many different types of organizations to submit data in a consistent format. So I don't, it's not as simple as, I can't send out one email that solves the problem. What I do is I have a 2-hour conversation with every single grantee after every data collection to talk them through line by line what's wrong with the data, what's right with the data, and what could be improved. So I think our real focus for the first year has been, from the grantee side of things, has been consistency. I would say at the same time for the national broadband map itself, there has been a particular challenge in messaging what we have and how we can articulate that. So for instance, when you have this issue of somebody saying, well, I type my address in the national broadband map, my address doesn't have broadband, you say there's broadband. Well, there's a whole host of issues going on there. One is we have block level availability, or we have road or address level availability. So that's what we have pretty clear about stating that. I think if you were to take a poll, so one of the interesting things is the only thing people probably know less than speed is probably what a census block is. So if the research that I've seen suggests that something like 8 to 10% of Americans know what speed they actually subscribe to. So that was an FCC poll ago. I think that number is probably less for what a concept of a census block is. It's such a minute level of geography. It might be an apartment complex. It might be a city block. It might be greater than 2 square miles. The variation there is enormous. And so I think, and trying to articulate a very academic, wonky thing like geography is incredibly challenging when you're trying to give somebody the Comcast serves here at 50 megs. Yes, sir?
Just follow up on the census block. This time around, everyone needed to use their 2010 census blocks instead of the 2000. That caused quite a lot of consternation. In the end, it was possible, but that was a left-hand turn for this last scenario.
We don't have to do it once, though.
Yeah, I think with the 2010 census boundaries, we're going to have to make that shift at some point. And so there's really a question of, well, what's the best time to do it? So, with new 2010 census boundaries come new demographic data. So we could use that. We could really kind of build that in. And also, the sooner we adjust it to that, the longer time frame we have to actually do time series analysis. So now that we've got consistent boundaries, essentially for the next decade or so, we can actually start, hopefully, getting that picture of kind of how things change over time. Essentially, we knew it was going to be trouble. We wanted to jump through the hoops. We had to at some point, so we just kind of went with it.
Could you identify yourself?
Mike Healing for Arizona.
And I'm Brett Legg with Connected Nation. We're working in 12 different states on the mapping projects. And I think with regard to 2010 census blocks, I think some of our states are anxious to make that transition, particularly ones that have had significant population change and growth. Nevada is one of those. The population in and around Las Vegas, for instance, has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And so the the State Broadband Task Force is anxious to get their hands on data that's represented in the 2010 census block format because they want to see how things have changed in and around those cities that have had major growth.
I mean, there's essentially millions of new census blocks with 2010 census boundaries. So you went from, like for instance, in New York, you went from about 250,000 blocks to 350,000 blocks. In California, the number increased several 100,000 times. So the nice thing about the finer tuned census boundaries was it also gave us the ability to get to some of these more minute questions, to have some of the blocks broken up a little bit, so we could rely less on some of the road and the address point data, which is very time and resource intensive, because we have, hopefully we have smaller, more accurate census boundaries. So, how many people? There's probably been a lot of conversation, or at least I like to think that because I'm a broadband geek, and it's specifically a broadband data geek, and there's like 3 of us. How many people, just show hands, think that on general, would say the national broadband map data is good?
Define good.
Well, I'm going to go through good, bad, or ugly. I'm kind of curious where everyone sits. So, good. I mean, whatever that assessment is for you. Not that it couldn't be better, but that it's good.
Give us a F grade, a C grade, A grade.
Oh, all right. All right. How many give it an F? How many give it a D? C? Of course, it's going to be a curve.
Yeah, of course.
A B and an A. All right, so it's
his vote counts. His vote counts.
So that was close to a normal bell-shaped curve. That was exactly close.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of the national broadband map as much as the data being good or bad. It's just the complaints we get at Connect Arkansas have been more as far as the presentation of the data, which we talked about before. So as far as you put in an address and it goes to the central census block, which may actually be in a different providers' coverage area, and so that's the biggest problem we have. And we can't speak for the accuracy of the other states. We feel good about our stuff.
Sure.
So the other states feel good about their data as well.
So sorry, are you saying presentation in the sense of the messaging around it, or literally the way it looks on the page?
A little bit of both. The biggest problems we have is someone putting in an address. Our biggest problem we've had is someone putting in a zip code or a city as opposed to putting in a full address, and it taking them to an area that they don't expect it to. Because in several instances, the area that may cover one zip code is a pretty significant area. And so when it pulls out an address that's in the census block that's at the centroid or however it selects that one point, we're talking about the difference of it being different providers altogether. And in some cases, in most cases, that's the problem that we have to deal with as far as people calling us with problems with the national broadband.
Yeah, so we take the centroid in the middle of a zip or city or whatever based on Google's API, and we actually try explaining that in text on the very top of the website before all the clickable, pretty things below it. And we found that for some strange reason, people are reading it.
Yeah.
Tara had her hand up?
Yes.
Or the gal behind you, actually, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that as far as a letter grade for the broadband map, it's sort of difficult because I think what you are working with is what we've given you to work with. So even though from my state's perspective, we don't drive people to the national broadband map because we update our map as we get data. So data submission dates, they make sense for NTIA, they make sense for asking providers once every 6 months, do you have updates? But the providers know whenever they update their systems, whenever they upgrade or serve a new community, they come and tell us, and we update our state map within a week. And so we don't drive people to the national broadband map. We say if you want the data to be accurate, go to our state map. And so I think it's hard to give the national broadband map a real letter grade because my biggest problem with it is that it's 6 months out of date, and it's always 6 months out of date. And but you know, that's what you're working with. Like you said, you're collecting data from 56 different entities, and I think it's been a monumental effort and a monumental first step, and it can only get better. My real question to present to you, I guess, would be what happens in the next 2 or 3 years when most states don't have money for data collection. What's going to happen to the national broadband map, and then what's going to happen to state mapping efforts in your perspective? Or your unofficial perspective?
Yeah, I was going to say, federally as a government employee, I have no opinion on that. Whatever Congress allocates is what they allocate. I do think, if you look at the model of how other sort of federal programs or kind of exist, they go out, somebody creates something new, there's a new piece of legislation, there's money behind it, and then this kind of constituency builds up around it and says, no, this is actually valuable, this is important. So, at some point, whether or not funding will continue to exist for broadband mapping programs and state planning efforts from the federal government, it really comes down to whether or not there is a constituency that calls a congressman or organizes around it, or really people getting the need, the so what. I can talk about trans tech code, and I'm sorry for you if you don't deal with this on a daily basis, but I can talk about trans tech code 10 versus 4041 and the differences between max add down to 7 or 9. That's my life right now, unfortunately. But the reality is, if the data can't be used for something important, if it can't be used to inform policy, if it can't be used for some of these big picture questions, then I think there's going to be a real challenge for the efforts to continue to exist. Now, my hope is the amount of effort that everyone's putting into it means there's going to be some real gold mines here. I think, officially we use the term policymakers, so theoretically, if there were an independent agency that were considering revamping a $9 billion fund, we hope that they would use the best source of data available on broadband availability, which we think is the the state broadband initiative data set. So I think it really depends, and I think we're still trying to put a finger on our pulse of what it means to have states collect data. So is there anyone here from NISGIC? So, National States Geographic Information Council, it's sort of an association that's built up around this issue of state resources to maintain, utilize data. They've been a key player. They helped build the initial data model used for essentially for receiving data from grantees in a consistent format. They've been hammering for this issue for years now, of saying we want more state leadership in data collection efforts. So I think there's room for good things to happen, but I think it depends a lot on what the data is used for and who starts supporting it and how global it can be. So that's kind of my long-winded answer saying I hope we're around.
Well, can I ask one more thing then?
Sure.
Speaking about what it's used for, the only comment that we got on a consistent basis, I think we've got it like 3 times, is that to qualify for satellite broadband
The RUS.
Yeah. For an individual consumer to get that discount, they have to go on the national broadband map, find their address, and show that it's unserved or whatever the requirements are. And I know we've discussed this before, but they weren't coding rural addresses correctly, and so those consumers are not able to get the discount because we can't prove that they don't have service.
Yeah.
And there's no remedy with the satellite carrier, yada yada. But
yeah. So I will say we've been in consultation with USDA specifically on this project. They're using our APIs, so which means that the most accurate data on the national broadband map is what they continuously use for that tool. That being said, and we've talked about the limitations of that, and we've also talked about the limitations of, quite frankly, geocoding. So actually having an address in a rural area is extremely difficult. Companies like Google rely on the essentially urban areas to mine their data. And if they can't mine their data, so in a rural area where it's not really feasible to mine data, their data is not going to be as good. So there is a challenge for addressing, which is also why we funded address file projects to actually kind of build some of that capacity in the state. So our hope is, I think there's a lot of challenges we try to address with a very small pot of money, and we're really hoping to drive best practices out of those and really kind of direct set with that. I think Drew's going to.
Yeah, I have a question about the APIs and how you're finding those used. Particularly just thinking about integrating the APIs that you've now got on the National Broadband Map into more data sets. Have you worked with any of the major mapping companies, Google or otherwise, about ways to take these image coded carrier maps and other maps into a Google map?
So I think we've talked to a lot of large companies. We've had meetings with large mapping vendors. There has been a lot of use. We do know there's a lot of use of APIs. So because of government IT rules, there's sort of two ways to set up an API. One is it's a free and open API, anyone can access it. And the other way is you make people sign up for a token, and then you register them. And then when you register them, you have all their contact information. So you can say, you can pick up the phone, give somebody a phone call. The route we went through, because we had a limited time frame in order to launch the map, and I think it's the route that most advanced APIs are kind of using at this point, is just making it free and open. So we don't have necessarily precise analytics on exactly who is working with it. Now what we do have is we do end up seeing a lot of referrals through other tools like Google Analytics. We do end up seeing where a lot of the traffic comes from. There have been several APIs. I haven't seen the, to date, I'm not aware of the big blockbuster of a Google integrating it into search results, for instance. I haven't seen that yet.
Back to the concept of unserved. By definition, we will not be able to show unserved with just the telco input.
Which
Because they always show served. Okay? So you don't have, they're not keeping track of what they're not serving. They're only reporting those who they do serve. You have to have another filter in the background to show where the unserved areas. And for that reason, I'm going to very strongly suggest that you really recommend to USDA, when they're talking about going to apply for grants and so forth, have them come to the states where the applications are from. Let us get involved with our own mapping data and really put them in the consultant mode with us so that at least their grant applications are accurate, at least more accurate. Because by definition, again, the national map has no way of showing unserved, because all you're getting reported is served data. Meaning that you're only showing where telcos provide.
Right. So about a week ago, the FCC put out a map that was the opposite. That was what are census blocks with population that don't have broadband coverage right now. So that was out about a week ago or so. But you're right, we capture where there is broadband.
And the process, because you mix the media, mix the medium, either of address or of shapefiles, you didn't really get a good accurate coverage, because the infill of a wireless is one thing, and what they can light up in 10 days, for example, or 5 days, or whatever, which is a nice criteria, by the way. Use that as a stick now. But wireless providers, they should not just report what their coverage area is. Typically, they don't have that many customers and could easily report their customer base. So that they would probably they're resisting it because that's their competitive advantage and they haven't developed trust yet.
Yeah, I think the wireless question is a really interesting one. How many people think of, and I would differentiate between fixed, mobile, and satellite, but how many people think of mobile wireless as a replacement for wireline?
No, absolutely not.
I mean, just show hands. Anyone think that mobile is a replacement?
A lot of people in the communities that I meet, there are quite a few younger ones that do.
Yeah. So generally speaking,
yeah, you need both.
Yeah.
Both. It's not a matter of which, it's both.
So would you find a sort of a difference in a fixed broadband versus mobile broadband, and you could be unserved in either? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
But fixed broadband is fiber.
Fixed?
Fixed broadband is fiber versus
No.
DSL.
No, it can be fixed wireless too.
Fixed wireless.
Well,
Fixed
I'm
wireless.
talking about fixed. So fixed in the formal definition is any wireline technology plus fixed wireless.
oh,
So that's typically fixed wireless. So that's as opposed to mobile wireless, which you can go between multiple towers and there's no problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with mobile. You're obviously mobile when you are measuring it. It's relative. Besides that, depending on the retention rates of what the most voice traffic is on those towers, you're going to go down considerably. You'll go a magnitude of 10 instantly.
Do you publish Arizona? Do you publish underserved and unserved numbers?
We're working on the definition right now. And so we don't, I don't feel we have a really good definition of unserved. I thought that the NTIA's definition wasn't a bad one because it allowed price to be proxied by numbers of users in an area. It was not a bad way to do it. But so far, I think we're going to make an adjustment and have an Arizona standard of what unserved means for Arizona as opposed to. But we hope we're going to be at least touching the national broadband standards of the discussion with NTIA in their original.
North Carolina right now does calculate estimates of unserved population by household, like estimated percent household, and it could be by census block or by county, some other area of interest, maybe municipality boundary. And when we do that currently, we haven't published it yet because we're still kind of waiting to see what the consensus is on definition and also speed threshold. But right now, we're excluding mobile technology, mobile wireless and satellite, because of the potential limitations there might be with speed, variability, or with devices that need to be compatible with mobile broadband.
How many people think of broadband as the speed definition of 4 down, 1 up? How many people think that's a sufficient definition of broadband for speed? Can you raise your hands? For now?
Yep.
How long do you think that? I guess what sparks you to say that?
I mean, especially when you start talking about kind of people cutting video to their house. I mean, 4 megabits is probably right around the area that you could probably run one Netflix,
Barely.
one Netflix and one.
Right.
So, I don't know. I just kind of think of it like that.
So it's almost, so you're thinking 4 megs per house or per person per household?
Yeah, almost. Well, I mean, as soon as people really start cutting their video service to their house and start watching it via the web, I mean, that's going to be even more important. You'll see service providers start to jack up the speeds a lot more.
Yeah, the migration of television content to the internet is going to be a major driver and totally transforms the definition of what broadband is to be adequate in a typical household.
Has anyone here clipped their cable cord?
Just about to do that.
My son has. We're looking at it. He has.
Yes, ma'am?
I just want to make a comment. I think that for economic development and for jobs and for telecommuting and all of the issues that all of our rural communities are really faced with right now, we need to look at the definition of broadband being, if not symmetrical, then at least closer to symmetrical, or at least be talking about that. Because,
Absolutely.
Having a consumer network where people can only consume and not produce network services and content is going to be disadvantageous.
And collaboration
Rural communities,
can't
they've
be
got to
supported.
be able to put business, they've got to be able to upload information onto the network from wherever they are in their rural community, or they're not going to be competitive for jobs, for attracting high-tech industry, for attracting creative workforce, for education purposes. all of those economic development things that rural communities are so in need of right now.
I couldn't agree more. Symmetricality actually should be part of the
Absolutely.
definition of broadband.
But it flies in the face of the marketing ploys of the company.
I think that you can drive symmetricality by bifurcating the content from the content provider. Because right now the content provider is threatened with symmetrical performance simply because an individual can be a content producer that's taking eyeballs away from content that the broadband provider is offering. So,
Exactly.
and it's all advertising. It's advertising dollar driven, which is eyeballs. So
It has to be a dumb pipe. It has to be just bits or bits. And I agree with this gentleman that separating the content providers from the owners of the of the fiber or whatever, that would be the ideal situation. That's why municipal networks, I think, have a critical role to play, because in that case you can have, that gets into the whole network neutrality and all kinds of other issues as well. But there are some significant advantages for consumers who can take advantage, who can be connected via a municipal network, where you're not going to have those issues of the Time Warner, cable company not wanting me to upload, some new, programming that they would see as competitive.
So you had the gentleman up here said, 4 megs kind of per person per household is an interesting kind of way to think of it, because you can stream movies. What do people think of, when everyone else said they don't necessarily think 4.1 is sort of broadband speed, is it higher or lower?
Higher.
People say higher. Anyone say lower? Any?
Well, what is it that is so critical for a person to do at 4 meg that if they can't do that, they are not served? Like, is Netflix a right of a citizen that if I can't stream video, I am underserved by my broadband? If I can't upload family photos to Flickr, then I am being left behind? Because I don't have that speed in my house. I don't have much of your one. Sorry.
well, I think that's a function of the device that you're looking at it on. If it's a 4x4-inch screen, that's one thing. But if it's a 60-inch screen, that requires more bandwidth.
Yeah, I think video is going to become more important, not only for entertainment, but for education, for innovation. And as we look at the change in our economy and the move towards less people having a job they go to from 8 to 5, and people that have multiple consulting or service jobs that they depend upon, one of the modes of delivering that potentially, or interacting with their customers, is this. They may need very high resolution video to send to a customer. And I think I personally think that's going to grow.
So,
I think-
sorry.
I just say, I think we rely too much on the residential definitions of purpose. I think that more importantly, we need to look at commercial availability, and that always should be symmetrical, because the ability that you have of transferring large files back and forth is key to the business, especially if you're trying to do backups, other really high-speed demanding.
Are you?
And e-learning and all of the types of things that are commercially based. The applications, the residential, he makes a point that I think is valid point, but that also has to do with personal taste. Now, I would fail in my area because I can't, with 4 meg standards, symmetrical, I can't get over 3 by definition of the hardware that's in my area. So the entire 85201 area code in Mesa, Arizona would be turned off as far as both Quest and Cox are concerned, because Quest absolutely has no ability to serve that area with more than 3 megs.
So you'd be unserved.
So now I just become unserved. That doesn't mean I don't have connectivity to the internet. I just don't meet the broadband standards. Now, those are two different things also.
Right.
We need to make sure that we understand what we're talking about. To be broadband, I think the telcos need to have a standard that they can also report against and be relied on. And also, it comes into the issue of FTA, trade commission issues, which are a public utility corporation, as a matter of fact, takes on regularly.
What do you think about the SAMNOS results?
Again?
The SAMNOS, the study published by the FCC in August timeframe, the measurement study, where if you measure the basically you measure the wireless router from the box, the actual wireless router that's connected to the pipe in the home that goes to a server, and if you measure that, what they found is, generally speaking, you're looking at something like the 90%. You're getting the sort of that speed you're paying for. So if you pay for 15, it's about that 90% range. That's an FCC study, but I thought that was a little interesting.
Yeah. I just like what the cable companies have done to game the system. They went, when you set the 50 meg to 100 meg standard as what is it, group 9 or 10?
Yeah.
50 to 100 meg. They upped their upper limit to 51 megs, because so now they get to report that they have 50 to 100 meg coverage.
Well, but we use greater than, so if they were just would use 50, it would have been the same thing.
No, they get a whole extra 49 meg.
It's greater than, so it's greater than is equal to, so it's always, the 50 is 50 to 100, inclusive.
So then it should be 49 or below or something. I mean, the gaming of the system, and when in reality, we have never found a test anywhere that has been more than half of the speed that's advertised as their advertised speed.
Even when that subscriber is subscribing to the maximum tier?
Oh, yeah. If they're saying they're, no, more than half, I think, is that not correct?
That's correct. That's what we.
That's reasonable for what we found. The SAMNOS data, though, is probably the best nationwide data that's been published.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. There's so many other things that go into it. Cox spends a lot of time, and our friends, the cable companies, hey, their life depends on this. And they've had free reign to do whatever they want for the last 10 years, and we're changing the message. We're trying to bring standards into something where there's never been a standard before.
And I think you'd also agree that in a large effort, a lot of the data originates in some places with providers, and a lot of times. So there is sort of a large cooperation going forward of providers giving data, state grantees sort of processing data, and going through the verification integration methodologies, and then pushing on further to us. So I think you see at least a lot of groundwork for that kind of partnership kind of moving forward.
And we try not to be the negative side of that. We don't want to be we're not punitive in our discussions. We're just trying to get more accurate data.
Right, and NTIA, we're not a regulatory agency, so we have no regulatory function whatsoever. We're focused on economic development, putting out accurate statistics, numbers, those sorts of things.
I was just wondering, since this is so dynamic and we're talking about the relevance of potentially moving beyond the 4-down, 1-up definition of availability, at what point do you think that we will change from the 768 down 200 kilobits of definition that we're currently using as data administrators for the grantee project?
So that's actually a great question. So when we put out we published the NOFA before the National Broadband Plan came out. So we use the same speed tiers that the FCC has been using for a while now. And as part of that, the bottom definition was the 768-200. If you'll notice in many places on the national broadband map, we are using the 3 to 6 meg tier. So between 3 and 6 down, and 768 to 1.5 up. A lot of our sort of base analytics are computed at that measurement. So regardless of, we're going to continue collecting data in that kind of format, and the benefit of having very granular data at different speed tiers is we can make those calls about what those thresholds should be at any time, and we can just run another analysis. So I think that's kind of how we're viewing that issue.
So are your estimations of availability already calculated using that 3 meg?
Most actually use that 3 to 6 and 768 1.5.
Yeah, my perspective on this issue that's just been discussed, Drew Clark Partnership for Connected Illinois, is that because the NTA is requiring us to collect these 11 speed tiers, tiers 1 and 2 are actually not broadband, but they mirror the less than 200 and up to 768 kilobits per second. And right now, 3 and above is broadband for the FCC's definition. But as I said in the first panel this morning, I fully expect that in coming years, 4 and 5 and 6 will soon be the threshold for broadband. So it's kind of a non-issue. I don't think we really need to spend time talking about what broadband is and isn't. We just color them out according to the way you want to look at it. If you want to look at broadband at 6 megs and up, or 10 megs and up, you can do that.
Stephanie stole my question. But the question I've got though is if you're getting data, for example, some of the data we get from different providers, you're still report on NSA or RSA level. You get a max in a larger area per se.
Right.
And you go out in the rural area, maybe in that same NSA RSA, and they're going to report it at whatever speed they want to. So you're kind of stretching it out anyway. But and I'm kind of dancing around a little bit here, but the question I've got is how do we, without someone, say the NTI or someone like that, getting an agreement with trade organizations, with telcos and cable companies, to get them to specifically give us data for and so forth, with a little bit more granularity. I mean, is there any, you have any ideas on that?
Granular speed?
Yeah, granular speed, not only that, just that 4 megabit threshold.
Yeah.
Because we get a lot of providers, for example, if we push it to 4 megabits, and I'm just guessing here,
yeah.
But I would assume in Arkansas we'd probably lose 50 to 60% of our coverage.
So I mean, I think I think what Drew said really it kind of aligns with our thinking, right? We're still going to collect in these speed tiers, but it really comes down to what sort of analysis do you want to do as a state, as somebody sort of helping lead this conversation in your sort of community. What level of speed do you think is appropriate? So, and then I think you've got the speed question. I think you've also got this technology mix question of, is it all wireline plus fixed wireless? Is it you count mobile, and how do you count mobile? Do you do those separately, and what do you do with satellite? I think all those combinations are, like I said, I think it's the benefit of having the granular data is you can actually just look at that picture and start creating your own analysis because you have it. And if we didn't have it, I think we probably want it. Is kind of my guess.
One other point to keep from everybody else. One of the things that, from a user perspective, because we look at a lot of different technologies, is that the user loses interest after 11 seconds. And so if you're at a low speed or you're on satellite, one of the pretty key issues, if it's interactive and it's kind of going back and forth, it times out. And so what happens is it's not functional, right? And if you look at adoption, which really comes from any country, any place you go on, is first world order, it has to work to provide that. And so there's some real simple things that kind of fall into that. One, it has to be timely. Two, you have to be able to afford it. But that first one, it's got to work, is really kind of important. So as you look at the speed that's going up, it requires the operators in the back to not resell that capacity so many times. And at that point, the networks don't get clogged. Okay? And so therefore it becomes more interactive, which is exactly what most users want, right? Not the low-end users, but most users. And more importantly, it's when people change and adopt the technology. So if you're trying to change areas, it first has to be able to access it. Secondly, it's got to work so that it's somewhat interactive. At that point, they start buying things differently. So that's why it's so important to try and move it up to 4, 5, 6, or 10. The other part is an economic argument that you don't really hear about in the measurement side. It's actually cheaper to have more users using it at a higher speed because you've got more widgets traveling over the same network, right? And I think that's the other key part that isn't brought up in some of the arguments. So by actually putting more fiber and broadband and middle mile, kind of what VTOP and BIP is doing now, you're going to increase traffic at a lower cost. The second part is it will allow it to be used more and people will adopt it. Right? And I'll just give you one small example from my wife's hometown of Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, is that the people that live outside that come in use broadband and all those things, but the people that are still kind of in the dial-up world or supposedly DSL that doesn't really work, they don't really use it because it's not interactive. They actually get their email by hitting the button, walking away for 45 minutes, and then coming back again. Why would you use it, right? And they're all talking about, well, we live on our stuff, you know, we look at it, we're walking around. It's just completely different, right? And even though they will tell you they got a DSL on it, I mean, it just doesn't work, right? And I think that's the fundamental issue, is it's got to work, it's got to provide it at an interactive speed, right? And at that point, it gets stopped and used. And that's where it's transformed.
Yeah, I think right now you're dealing with about, NTI, I don't know, many people probably don't know this actually, but NTI publishes the largest broadband adoption study in the country. It's 66,000 users, 66,000 people every year. Those numbers are about 66, something like that, % of people adopted it. And then I think everyone's pretty familiar with the reasons for non-adopting. But in terms of those numbers, you know.
Is the NTIA chartered by Congress to set standards in certain areas?
Let's see here. The Department of Commerce is. So, for instance, NIST sets standards. They are a standard-setting body. So, as part of Department of Commerce, I think NIST is the agency within our organization that handles that.
It would be a great boon if we could have a national standard regarding broadband set, independent of what, you know, given the best technology, the best decision. At some point, you're going to have to say, cut, this is the standard, this is where we're starting from, and because right now there really is no standard. So we're playing around with color schemes and heat maps. And we really don't have a good definition, bottom end, of what broadband means. And until we do that, it's always going to be mush. And the citizens out there who we're trying to serve will be just confused. So we need a standard that eliminates the ambiguity.
I'd like to follow up on Galen's point about we need a standard. If NIST is getting involved in it, we need a method of testing that standard for that result. Not only do we need what the result is for the standard, we need a method of testing it.
Yeah,
because the methods of testing are so variant in the outcome. And what makes this extremely difficult is when you test it and when I test it, we have black and white difference in results.
Sure.
We both walk away frustrated and we never answer the question of what's connectivity that we tested.
Yeah, so let me clarify, saying I wasn't inviting this to go ahead and take into this field. I was just saying they're the standard body in the Department of Commerce. But I mean, yeah, of course, anytime you set a metric, you need to be able to measure it. Anytime you set a standard, you have to be able to measure it.
That is my comment.
Number 3 on your item was pricing, and Brenda raised that. It would be good to get some of people's thoughts on that issue and how state broadband initiative entities can contribute pricing. Anyone who's already done so in a major way, what NTIA feels about pricing data, which is also not pledged right now.
Sure.
Keep in mind we have just a few minutes left, so we want to maximize that.
Yeah, so I can say in the May 28, 2010 grant guidance we put out, we allowed the entities who've already received a grant to apply for funds for best practices. One of those best practices was thinking about ways of collecting publicly available pricing information. So I think that's something we're waiting for. We received many different proposals from grantees across the board on that. So I think we're still waiting for some of that data to come in.
And an advertisement for Telelogical. They're outside. They're one of our RTC sponsors here. Go see what they have to say. I think you'll enjoy what they have to say. And it will be thought-provoking. And they may even have an answer for us.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say too, it might be interesting to consider different levels or different ways of understanding pricing data. For example, you know, because it's very difficult, right? Like we have a questionnaire that we include with our map that, you know, we ask people what price are you paying, and then we have to ask, well, is it bundled or unbundled, and all of those kind of things. So, you know, if there was some way maybe from the federal level down to get everybody to think in terms of dollar per megabit or something like that, so you would have, you know, so you're comparing apples to apples, because otherwise it's very difficult.
I think the methodology, just the way of working that we've been using for this program is really to get initial input from states. Because a lot of times, for instance, we don't collect data right from broadband providers for this program. So I don't call up Comcast or AT&T and say, hey, we need your data. States actually do that. So states own those relationships, or state entities. So they own those relationships. They make that happen. And so for us, what we're seeing is we're seeing something that may have started with a provider that was verified, integrated by the state entity, and then comes to us. So I think that methodology is definitely something we're going to see, because anytime we set a standard or anytime we collect data, we have to go through different processes like PRA, Public Records Act. So we've got to, we have to put out, and that takes a lot of time to do government data collection. So essentially, if we do something, we have to get it right. So for us, it's far easier to be in an experimental stage where we're not necessarily driving it, but we're able to continue to collect those sorts of research pieces of information, so we can ultimately get to something that makes sense and could stand the test of time.
I'd like to follow up on your comment about a standard, and that just sprung to my mind, the per unit cost in a grocery store, where you can tell how much you're paying per pound for a product.
Yep.
What's the difference between a pound of, for a pound per product at a grocery store and a megabit per second on broadband? Couldn't it be done something like that?
They don't bundle the shopping cart with the banana.
Well, but unbundle. Here's the cost of your broadband, but then they can play with other things. So I see your point.
Well, I mean, that is a great point. I mean, the food labeling that the FTC requires or FDA is a great ability to compare one ingredient on the can with another. And then I actually find myself, when I do go shopping, looking more at the left-hand price than the right-hand price. You can, I mean, I don't know who requires that. I mean, maybe no one. Maybe it's just the stores that do that.
I was just going to say, I mean, in the public sector currently, service providers are harvesting and structuring and comparing pricing data on a daily basis. When you call into Comcast to cancel your service, they use a tool that has their data structured in an apples-to-apples way against their competitor that will allow them to do a comparison on that. So it is something that's possible. It's something that's currently being done in the private sector, but not, not necessarily public sector.
They buy their data from Telelogical.
Well, they're doing it on their own as well. So.
And in a lot of cases, they use that for customer retention. You say I'm quit, they say, well, we can drop the price by 20.
And I asked, why did you drop it before?
By the way, in our state map in Arizona, we're going to, for our CAIs, we're going to have show as much as we possibly can what their cost per megabit is for that particular CAI. Now, it's going to be done in a way that is going to be, if it's behind a firewall and represents 25, we're going to have some methodology to come up with it. But I think it'll be interesting for us to be able to compare then what the really, and we want to see this by region and by comparison by communities against each other, what really is happening out there, and we don't have it yet until when we get there for 6,000, 6,000 or 7,000 CAIs in the map, and we'll have a pretty good piece of data.
Yeah, I think that's a mixed bag per state. I mean, some states you'll have like a state-run network that goes through 80% of the CAI, so schools, libraries, hospitals. In some states you don't have that, so I think that's always going to be a challenge. I think, and that also kind of underscores why a state approach matters and why it works. Is there's so much variation between the states. It's truly unbelievable, and every once in a while I'll get a call from somebody, and it'll just be, okay, I know you keep saying that this is the rule, but this is an exception. I keep finding it over and over again. It's because our state doesn't like. State of Washington has these publicly owned pipes that get leased out to resellers, and so they don't meet any of our definitions per se, but they're publicly owned pipe that could be up to a gig technically. And so you keep finding just a lot of variation in the states and in communities. So I think it, you know, it's probably, I mean, just personally, it's a very exciting part of working on the project because I think it's, you know, you see the variation, it's really interesting. So I think that's all I got. Thank you.